Hey everybody, welcome to this Photoshop tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com, where today we're going to go through a 15-step or so process of making you a master at using Vanishing Point in Photoshop. It's an incredible tool. Before we get started, I'm selling a course on advanced Photoshop stuff over on my site. There's a little card link that just appeared in this video. Click it and check it out. Everyone hates advertisements, so I'm not going to sit here and try to sell it to you. Let's get on with Vanishing Point. Now, before I begin with Vanishing Point, I typically like to create a new blank layer. This is because when we're using Vanishing Point, we're usually going to use it to clone or heal or adjust something on a pixel level, and I don't want to do that to the original image. I'd rather just have it on its own layer, so if I decide later on, whoop, I need to get rid of it, I can get rid of it. Let's go filter Vanishing Point. You can see there is a hotkey, but filter Vanishing Point is going to be, for the most part, what you do. Now, when we enter the Vanishing Point dialog box, here we have the first thing that we're presented with, I should say, is the Create Plane tool. And the Create Plane tool is going to sort of basically prompt us to create a new Vanishing Point plane. And you can see here, I'm going to click once, I'm going to click twice, and this image is very easy to create somewhat of a relatively accurate Vanishing Point plane because there are so many straight lines. Some images are going to be very tough. I'm going to click here. You can see I'm just following the lines here in this alleyway. Now, you can see, hey, look at this. We got a yellow grid. A yellow grid is not good. A red grid is worse, but a blue grid is what we really want. When you get a grid like this, it just means that one of the corners still needs to be adjusted. So you can see we've got our anchor corner handles. We also have sort of side anchor handles. Those are for pulling and stretching our grid. We'll talk about that in just a second. But we need to just adjust this a little bit to make it what is more of a realistic perspective plane. Photoshop knows this is not quite right. Now, I just should pause here and let you know, you can technically still use your grid when it's yellow like this, but you won't really get the greatest of results. So, let's just stack the cards in our favor and try to tweak and adjust this. Oop, there it goes to red. Red is really bad. There we go, blue. Blue is perfect. You can see I just had to adjust that one corner, level it out a little bit, and boom, we've got our blue grid. Now, once we've got the blue grid, let's say we hadn't drawn it over the entire alleyway, you can grab any of these sort of midway handle points, and you can shorten the grid, you can lengthen the grid, you can widen the grid, you can make the grid a little bit more narrow. Anything that needs to happen, you can come in and tweak and adjust the grid that way. Now, when you have one grid, you can go back to the Create New Grid tool, and you can click anywhere, and you can create an additional grid that is just completely separate of our first grid, right? And just sort of follow the perspective of the image, so to speak. Let's just throw a grid up here. All right, you can see we've created a new grid, and I can drag it wherever, and hey, well, we got some perspective going on. Now, this grid is not linked to our original grid. In fact, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to teach you how to get rid of a piece of grid that you don't want anymore, like this one. You grab the selection tool, you select that chunk of grid, and you hit the backspace or delete key, and boom, it's gone. We can select our original grid, and it is still alive and well. So getting back to our original grid here, let's talk about editing this grid. Now, let's say we've gone ahead and committed this change. We haven't really done anything. All we've done is laid down a perspective grid, which is not rendering in Photoshop, but it is still there. We can go filter Vanishing Point, and you're going to see, boom, up it pops, and it's still our grid. We've come back to this, let's just say 2 weeks later, and we realize, oh, you know what? We need to edit this grid. We don't just need to make it wider or longer, shorter, taller, anything like that. We actually need to edit it and change the actual perspective itself. We can do that, and you can do it by selecting that Create Plane tool again, right? That tool. And select any one of your corner points and go ahead and just drag them and move them around. So this obviously can be super useful when you need to go in and tweak grids, even grids that you just created 5 minutes ago. When you realize other grids aren't quite working or something is off, you can grab this tool and edit the corners of any grid. Amazingly useful. Let's grab the Move tool up here, or the Selection tool, and talk about what Photoshop calls tearing off new planes or something like that. I like to think of it as extending the Vanishing Point grid. You can do this by holding down the Command or Control key, selecting any one of your middle points, right? We're going to do it to both sides, and we're simply going to pull up. We're going to pull upward, and you can see that it is pulling another perspective grid out, which is going to run up this wall. Now you can see something's not right because it's not lining up with the wall as it should. A couple things going on here before we go any further. This photo was shot with a pretty wide-angle lens, and there is some lens distortion. That's part of what is factoring into this decision, or the decision that Photoshop is making to build the perspective grid here, because Photoshop is going to make its perspective grid look in perspective and be correct, so to speak. So you may have to tweak the size of your perspective grid. We're going to talk about how to do that in just a second. Just know that you can, grab this grid and pull it as high or low or, wide, whatever as you want. Let's select the floor grid again, hold down the Command or Control key, and pull a grid up for this side. Now this side wall looks much, much nicer. We'll just pull it up to about, I don't know, right about there, I guess. And let's actually stretch this out. All right, so we're going to stretch it way out to here so it kind of covers all of this area. And I can see that the lines pretty much run along the brick. Maybe it needs to be adjusted a little bit. But again, before we get to that, I want to show you something else. Let's just say we select this grid here and we pull another grid out sideward this way. So now we have some issues here because we have this grid basically covering that entire grid on that wall. You can actually still select that grid by simply holding down the Command or Control key and clicking on the area of the overlapping grids. When you do that, Photoshop will select one grid and then select the other grid and then select the other grid. So you can always select a grid even if you technically have a piece of grid that's sort of floating in front of it. So I'm just going to select this grid, hit the delete key, get rid of it, and you can see my other 3 pieces of grid are still here and they're doing well. Let's talk about fixing this wall. We're going to do this by adjusting the angle of the perspective grid. Let's pull this out just a little bit here, and we can tell these lines are not at all lined up with the edge of this building for starters. So we have just this piece of perspective grid selected. You can hold down your Alt or Option key and hover over those middle anchor points. You can see like a twisty-turny arrow shows up. You can click and drag and adjust the angle of your grid. Note, you can also do this up here. If you hover over the word angle, you can use the drop-down slider, but it's kind of like a pain in the neck. Nobody really does it that way anymore. You always hover over the word and get the scrubby slider, and then you can just click and drag one way or the other. All right? So you can see I pretty much have that cleared up, and then I'm going to pull this up a little bit higher, and now we have much, much better perspective over on this side of our alley. Changing the angle of a perspective grid is incredibly useful. I feel like I've said that a lot, but it's insanely useful to be able to do, and it's incredibly helpful to be able to sort of force that correct perspective based on the image you're working with. Because again, we're not really concerned about fixing the perspective of this image per se. We want this perspective grid because maybe we want to get rid of this hanging plant here, and in order to clone stamp this brick and place it over this brick, well, it's really incredibly difficult to do if you don't have something like a Vanishing Point grid set up. We're going to cover that stuff. Well, we're going to cover it right now, actually. Let's say we want to get rid of this hanging plant or this graffiti or this little sign over here. Let's work on the hanging plant first. So I select that grid first, and then I grab the Clone Stamp tool. Now, the Clone Stamp tool gives me some options. Brush tip size. Diameter of about 75 is probably fine. We can't quite see the size of the brush yet because we haven't selected a point from which we're sampling. Hardness of 55 is cool. When you're cloning and stamping, you really don't want it to be too soft. In fact, maybe I will crank it up to about 80. Opacity of 100 is a must. And we're going to go with a heal set to on. You can use a luminance heal, which theoretically works a little bit better than just a full-on heal because it allows the colors and textures to blend a little bit more. I almost always still just go with a full-on heal. And I'm also going to keep a line checked on just because of the way it works with my sampling point. Hold down your Alt or Option key, and let's click like right here. And we're going to move up. I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and use the plus icon. And what I'm looking to do is just line up the brick pattern. So right there, it looks pretty lined up. And then I'm just going to begin painting. And you can see that it's cloning and filling in brick and doing it all in perspective. So now I can zoom out a little bit. I could get rid of those vines. I'm not really going to take the time to do it. Of course you should if this is a client's image or something like that. But the fact of the matter is we have an amazing clone job that you could see. I mean, just doing the actual cloning took 5 seconds. And we get rid of something, and a very intricate, detailed, difficult to replicate, somewhat not regular brick pattern has been pasted over that potted plant. Do we need to fix the lighting of the brick a little bit? Yes. Would it be nice if we increased the diameter of our brush a little bit maybe? And maybe we sampled some more of this darker brick and we went in here and tried to heal with maybe some darker brick and fade it back into the brick a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you can see how much better that looks. So that's pretty cool. And we could do the same down here to clean up some of the bleached brick, but that brick was already like that, so I don't know how much you really want to touch it. So cloning along your perspective grids is insanely useful. We can zoom in here too down on the alley, let's say. We could select some of this macadam and paint and heal over that little manhole cover. That's great. This becomes so incredibly useful when you're working on an image like this where you maybe need to duplicate texture from the foreground but make it look like it's in perspective much, much further away from where the camera was when the photo got taken. maybe the most useful thing about vanishing points, at least for me and for a lot of photographers, is going to be just that. We also do have a paintbrush here, and it works kind of hand in hand with the eyedropper. You know, select the color with eyedropper, you can paint with it, you can change the brush color, whatever. I don't really want to get too much into it, but basically, you know, it paints along your perspective grid as well. Big brush strokes here, tiny little ones way down there. So let me now show you another feature of Vanishing Point. In fact, I'm going to hit the cancel icon there, and I'm going to just create a new layer here, and I'm going to jump back into the Vanishing Point dialog box. And here in Vanishing Point, you can see we still have our grids, everything's good. I want to talk about the marquee tool. So the marquee tool allows us to make selections in perspective. You can see, boom, it's in perspective. That's great. One of the really neat things, oh, by the way, you can deselect Command or Control D. A couple cool things you can do with this. There are a lot of hotkeys, and it can be really finicky, this tool. There is a method to the madness. It would literally take me 15 minutes to explain it all. So while I want you to be a master with Vanishing Point, if you have to tinker with the marquee tool a little bit, so be it. Here's generally how it works, though. Let's say we want to hide this, let's say we want to hide this graffiti, right? We drag a selection over the graffiti. Okay, something like that. You got the little white arrow, which is your selection move tool. You can move the selection to adjust it. And then what you would do is, you know, choose, do you want healing to be on or off, move mode, you get destination and source. I typically stick with destination for this kind of thing. And then you want to hold down the Command or Control key. Oh, maybe we should turn healing on. Command or Control, and just drag it over another brick pattern. You can see we'll go like right there, so the bricks kind of line up, and it's roughly going to try to heal it. If we hit Command or Control D to deselect, you can see it really didn't do that great of a job. The edges weren't feathered enough, considering the fact that we're moving into this very dark shadow. We probably should have feathered the edges of our selection. So let's undo that a bunch of times. Command or Control D to deselect. Let's up our feather game a little bit, move it to like 25 or something like that, and we'll try to make this selection again. There we go. Command or Control and drag this selection. Let's just drag it down here maybe. Something like that, and that looks a lot better. You can see it fades up into the bushes much better. It still needs some work down here. We can do that on another layer with dodge burn tools, kind of clean things up a little bit, so that's kind of cool. One of the other things you can do is you can actually duplicate elements. I'm going to get out of this image for a second to show you this. I'm going to hit OK here. You can see it's up on our new layer that we created. It's hiding that graffiti, and well, actually here, before we move to the other image, we can grab like the burn tool and just dust that in a little bit, make it kind of look a little bit more realistic. Maybe it needs to be lightened just a tiny bit. All right, so just like that. Sometimes you got to tweak it a little bit. Just a couple little clicks, boom, hidden, much better. Still not perfect, but you know, good enough for what we're doing here. Let's say we're working on this other image here. I'm actually going to hit undo a couple times. It's going to bring back some elements that I have down here, and I've already created a perspective grid for this image. So if I go File, oh wait, let me create a new layer. We like to work on a new layer, right? We're going to go Filter, Vanishing Point, and you'll see here I have, well, I had. Let me just zoom out. Maybe it's not there anymore. Let's create a new perspective grid here. Why not? You can see me create another perspective grid. This one's got to be really big, so I'm going to zoom out. I'm following that shoreline. I don't know if you can still see it. There we go, following the shoreline like so. We're going to pull this to about there. And then we got to kind of do this by eye. So it probably, the perspective needs to be something like that. Hey, look at that. It's blue, so that's good. Maybe, see if I bring it in too much, it's red. There's blue again. It really actually, I mean, it should be something like out here. That's probably about correct perspective. I don't have a line to run along the other side of that cruise ship that was there. Let's zoom in here. Let's talk about duplicating some objects. So if we use the marquee tool, we can duplicate this little boat. We can just drag a selection around him. And this is actually a really difficult image to use the marquee tool on because our grid is so flat. So any selection is going to be pretty massive. But we're going to try to do it anyway. The clone stamp actually might really be the best way to duplicate objects when you have a grid this big, but hey, you know what, we're going for it anyway. Hold down the Command or Control key. Well, actually, no, let's not do it that way. We're not going to use a hotkey here. We could use the Alt or Option key and drag it over, but we don't want to do that because, number one, we didn't turn healing on. We do probably want the edges to heal a little bit. Actually, what am I thinking? Let's Command or Control D to deselect. Let's give a little bit of feathering here, because we probably don't want to heal it because we want to preserve entirely the object, but we do want the edges to blend a little bit. All right, so I just put some healing on my selection. There we go. Move the selection a touch. All right, so we can hold down Alt or Option and drag it like I just showed you, and you can see like the boat gets bigger as it gets closer to us. See, we didn't really nail the perspective entirely correctly. You see how the boat's starting to look a little jacked up. All right, we can drop it there, and it'll technically be blended in place. Now, because we're doing this on its own layer, we can mask away a lot of that sort of errant water that doesn't look right. So we've got that, but you can also copy and paste. So we can just hit Command or Control C, Command or Control V to paste it, and then move our boat wherever we want. You can see, yeah, the perspective is definitely not right. But hey, we were doing it just kind of by complete guess. All right, so I can drop it there, Command or Control D to deselect, hit OK, and then I can come back here and mask this in by throwing a layer mask onto this object, grab my brush tool. I really shouldn't even be doing this in this tutorial to save time, but you know what? I'm picky. So then I can just paint away, see some of this water that just obviously does not belong, and let the boat kind of blend back in the way that it should, sort of. So we can very quickly copy and paste elements within our perspective grid relatively easily using the marquee tool as well. So that's something that's interesting to know. One of the other things we can do is we can paste in outside graphics. So let's say we've got this owl here, all right? The owl's actually pretty big. I'm going to rasterize him to keep him kind of small. Maybe I'm going to make him even a little smaller than he is, something like that, all right? I'm going to hit Command or Control A to select everything, Command or Control C to copy, and then Command or Control D to deselect. I'm going to hide that owl layer. I'm going to create a new blank layer because we're going to sort of mesh the owl to either one of these walls or the alleyway here on this new layer. We're going to go Filter, Vanishing Point. Remember, we still have our grids in place. Command or Control V to paste that graphic in. And now when I click and drag, when I drag the owl over one of these perspective planes, he is going to, as you can see, be forced into perspective with our perspective plane. So you can actually do something cool where you sort of make him wrap between two perspective planes as well. So we're going to drop him right here, I think, on the edge. Oh, what did I do? There he is. We're going to move him down closer to the edge, and we're going to drop him close to the edge. You can see it gets a little glitchy, Photoshop does, when you're messing with this. Let's just, we're going to put him down here on the alleyway, just like that. All right, so he's nice and in perspective, and at this point we can just hit OK, and out here on this layer we can then set this layer to the blend mode of like, soft light or something like that, and you get sort of this graphical overlay. Now, something I saw in there reminded me, we can also go Filter, Vanishing Point. The marquee tool, once again, rears its ugly head. We can create a selection across multiple planes. So you can start your selection here, drag it across like the alleyway, and even bring it up the other side wall. Well, it should go right there when we're dragging it. But you can see here when I just move the selection, you can move it across multiple planes, which means that all of those hotkeys, Command or Control, to sort of move background over whatever graphic we've selected, or if we wanted to duplicate this, we can hold down the Alt or Option key, and we can move the owl, way down that way. And again, if we had healing turned on, he would blend in a little bit better and things like that. But just know that you can create selections across multiple perspective planes and perspective grids as well, which is pretty stinking cool. I'm going to hit the cancel button here to get out of that because I don't want to keep that change. Another really neat thing you can do with Vanishing Point, again, as we've been doing, create a new layer. We're going to go Filter, Vanishing Point, and we have these really neat grids that we've built, but they don't show up in Photoshop. Let's say a couple of things. Maybe we just like them and we want them to be part of our design, or if we're drawing something in perspective and we just set our grids and we want to be able to take them from this image and maybe move them to a blank canvas and begin our drawing and our sketch over there, we can do that. We can do that by hitting the little Vanishing Point menu and just choose Render Grids to Photoshop and hit OK. Now it's going to drop those grids on that new layer that we created. It's going to drop the grids on whatever layer you're on when you enter Vanishing Point dialog box. So just know that. Now they are blue, but you can hit Command or Control U, and you can change them whatever color you want. If we want like pink grids, we can do that. And we can set them to a blend mode of, I don't know, overlay or something like that. You can see, well, they sort of blend in when they're like that. Command or Control I, it's going to give us more of, like a teal-y color. Now if we go to like overlay, we should be able to see them. No, we really still can't see them. Forget that. Command or Control U once again to bring up hue saturation. If we reduce lightness and bring it all the way down to -100, it'll just give us a grid that's solid black, which of course would be great here if I add a layer beneath this and fill it with white. Boom, you get this nice perspective grid, which you can use for your sketch or whatever it is that you're creating. So a lot of cool stuff that you can do with rendering grids. Let's talk about measurements in Photoshop. This is really, really neat, and I know I've been saying that all along, but this is especially cool. We can go Filter. Well, let's select a layer that is active here. Filter, Vanishing Point. We have our grids once more. We're going to grab the Measure tool. Now, the Measure tool, one of the things that's neat about this is we can do a few things. You can obviously click and drag out a measurement wherever you want this to be, and you can see it's saying this is 2.5 degrees, and it's a measurement of 9.3, whatever 9.3 is. This is a number that you can kind of define and make it whatever you want it to be, and let me show you why that's important. I'm just going to select this ruler, hit the delete button, and it's going to delete that ruler for me. Well, just shut my sound off there so we don't hear any of those dumb Photoshop sounds anymore. Let's say we know this alleyway is 10.5 feet across, all right? So I drag a measurement from one side of the alley to the other, okay? You can see 10.29. I'm going to set the length of this to 10.5 because I know in real life this alleyway is 10.5 feet exactly wall to wall. And then I'm like, you know what? I need to see how, like, what the size of this window is. So I can drag across this window, and I know that if the alleyway is 10.5 feet wide, this window is only a little over 1.5 feet wide. All right, I'm going to get rid of that ruler. In addition to that, I could drag like the entire length of this perspective grid and see how many feet theoretically it is all the way to the end of where this perspective grid is, kind of the end of the alley where that horizontal line is. So that's really neat. I'm going to undo a couple times here to get rid of that measurement. Another cool thing you can do with the measurement tool is you can simply double-click on any plane, and it's going to set rulers going lengthwise and widthwise. You can click any of these rulers and drag them back a little bit. See, so this one I can just drag it right over and saying, all right, look, it's 10.3 from side to side for that perspective grid, and then you know that it's a little over, 10 1/3 feet, let's say, to that perspective grid. Another neat thing you can do, and this is based on that original measurement that we inputted, so just know that. All right, and by the way, you can see that if the alleyway is 10.3 feet wide, the length of our grid here, in theory, is a little over 45 feet, about 45.25 feet. So measurements can be really cool. You can render these out to Photoshop. It's a little funky the way it renders them out to Photoshop, but if you want to come in and get like in real life measurements and really kind of see what the size of various objects in the scene is, it's a really, really cool tool to have. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this because I don't want to render measurements. Oh, you know what? In addition to rendering measurements, which I just talked about, right? So you can go render measurements right there. You can also return a 3D layer to Photoshop, which is going to give you a 3D environment with this perspective grid. I'm not really going to get into how you can use that. That would take a ton of time, and we're spending enough time on Vanishing Point. But you can return a 3D layer out of Vanishing Point, and create the perspective grids based on whatever image you're using to build your Vanishing Point perspective grids. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't want to save those measurements that I just created. Let's jump immediately, though, back to Vanishing Point. I feel like I'm using, getting out of Vanishing Point is just a quick reset. Let's say we love these grids and we want to use them in a different 3D modeling application. You can select your grids and export them as DXF files or 3DS files. You can also export Vanishing Point files for Adobe After Effects, which is really cool. It can be useful. You can export this and then go right over to After Effects and import your .vpe. There's a place where you can import Vanishing Point files to Adobe After Effects. So that can be really useful if you're using this and animating in 3D and all kinds of cool things like that over in Adobe After Effects. I should also throw in, as just an additional thing, occasionally when you go in here and you begin building grids, and especially when you start adding grids, right? So say I add a grid, sometimes, let me see if I can, no, I can't make it do it now. Occasionally when you do that, render grids to Photoshop and export for After Effects, and I think export for 3DS as well, they all show up grayed out. If that happens to you, all you need to do is just commit your changes and reopen the Vanishing Point dialog box, and then they will be there. So they'll show up and you can render your grids, or you can export for After Effects. Boom, one click, and it's done. So I think that's about it for Vanishing Point. We talked about drawing planes and editing planes and tearing off planes and extending planes and selecting overlapping planes and changing angles and cloning and marquees and 1,000 other things, it feels like. So for Vanishing Point in Photoshop, of which you are now a master, that's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. Wait, stop. Don't go anywhere yet. Before you click away, make sure you crush that like button down there, and also hit the button on the screen to subscribe to my channel, because you're not going to find anything like this online anywhere. And while you're at it, head over to tutvid.com, use the link here in the video, in fact, sign up for my newsletter. You're going to get 30 free time-saving tips in Photoshop. It's an amazing video and PDF that will automatically be sent to you when you sign up for my newsletter. And you can also follow me at all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, you name it, I'm there. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I'm out of here.